Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the One and O podcast. I'm Avery Hill.
I'm Lexi Linderman.
I'm Will Horseman.
Today, we want to touch a little bit on the House v. NCAA settlement that was approved late last week. Also, we want to touch on some future power rankings released by ESPN today. With the House v. NCAA settlement, after months of deliberation, you had all these different amendments to come out of it. We finally have the official finalized approval of the settlement. Obviously, the biggest thing being the back pay to athletes. You also have the salary cap that'll be among every school at 20 million around roughly. And then you have for football specifically the 105 rule where there's no scholarship caps, but there's a 105 player limit. Guys, what stood out most to you and what in terms of what will affect Penn State football?
I think the biggest part of this is obviously the revenue sharing. There's a lot of pieces to it, but I think the revenue sharing is just so important because you kind of see with the return of all these different players from one family, like Drew Aller, Denied Dennis Sutton, Nick Singleton, Cage Renown. I mean, obviously they're all back to chase national championship, but I mean, I would be surprised if money didn't play any of a factor. And Penn State can out promise guys that they're gonna get paid a lot of money. I mean, I think based on some estimates that are out there online, I'm pretty sure football is going to be given 16 to 17 million dollars out of the 20.5 to work with. That is a huge amount of money. That is almost the entire salary cap. And it's obvious that the athletic department is ready to put their all into this football program, which again, Franklin has talked at length about the alignment between him and Pat Kraft. And this is really going to be the biggest piece of that is all that money that is going to go to these football athletes. But then obviously there's the 105. I think the interesting thing about the 105 is I think her name is Claudia Wilkin, the judge. She held off on approving it because she wanted to make sure that any athletes that would be cut would be grandfathered in. And by my understanding, it seems like anyone who's going to be cut to meet that 105 number can play out the rest of their college eligibility. So it doesn't seem like the roster is going to see that much turnover in the coming years, but I think you'll just start to see Penn State taking a few less recruits, some things like that. But I think the 105 for now, sorry, I think the 105 for now isn't that big of a deal, but I think moving forward is going to be a big thing. But yeah, the revenue sharing was just changing college football. I mean, yeah, that's
I mean, James Franklin talked a lot about how he kind of disliked the new 105 rule because he didn't want to have to cut anyone and he wanted anyone still with the program to finish out their career at Penn State. But with how the roster limit's going to get grandfathered in, I don't think that it doesn't seem like that's going to be an issue. So I don't believe we've heard Franklin say anything about the grandfathered edition of the new settlement, but I think I think he would be okay with that. And then with revenue sharing going to some former athletes, I think that's probably the right thing to do because a lot of athletes played their collegiate career and probably could have made a lot of money through their NIL, but they were like 2 seasons before NIL started. So I think that's a great thing for the recent athletes that didn't get a chance to make money off their name.
Yeah, I think just about everyone can kind of agree that that back pay is the biggest and probably the most important part of it. Especially now that you see guys are getting millions. You have Nico. Getting millions of dollars. Like, and if you look in the past, you can compare some of these guys. Like, I think obviously like Baker Mayfield, like, these Heisman winning guys that didn't touch a dime. Some did in the NFL, but it'll really be a big help to all those guys that didn't make the NFL, got a free education out of it, but maybe they still didn't jumpstart directly into the career like they like. That is obviously going to help them kind of keep them on their feet. I don't recall exactly how much money they will be getting, but obviously it'll be a good amount. It'll be enough to where they can at least sustain themselves. Obviously, got to get a job. Like we not just flipping burgers. Like that LinkedIn resume got to be top tier, but the back pay is still there. I think another thing that was interesting to me is with the salary cap because as you said, Lexi, like 90, like I don't know, 90%, I don't do math like that, but 90% of the salary cap is going to go to the football team, if not 95. Like that is a huge chunk. That it'll be really interesting to see how that's spent, not just at Penn State, but among other schools. I think something that was interesting was I know there was something that came out about the private equity deal that Penn State was apparently had with UCLA with the company with UCLA and Penn State. But I know Pat Kraft came out and said, "Oh, like they're not funding our football team." I thought that was very interesting to me. I think now that is something we're going to start to see more of these private equity investments and things like that, and teams will just have to kind of get more savvy to, be able to really wisely spend their money to be able to use that salary cap. So I think it'll just be very interesting to see how that turns out. When you kind of look at the 105 rule situation, I think that was probably the biggest part of the settlement being held up a little longer than it should have. Having that chance for these guys, which they kind of considered as designated student athletes, giving them the chance to finish what they expected to get into from the beginning, I think is very important, and it'll be very interesting to see how Penn State deals with it. That'll kind of give them a chance to have those roster limits, but at the same time, you'll probably still see some guys go on scholarship. They have a bigger case to get a scholarship at this point because it's like we have 105 spots. Like, how do we only have like 80 guys on scholarship? So, I mean, I just think that'll be very interesting.
Yeah, I also think you mentioned like the private equity deals and stuff. I know that this is definitely something that's going to be happening in the future too. I think Kentucky has already moved to be like funding through a private LLC, and I think that it's just something that is. I mean, college football has already kind of moved into more of a professional sport than it really is a college sport at this point. And I think, what?
I say kind of.
Yeah, I mean, like it basically
All
is,
right,
and so
now.
I think like as we move forward, like I think it's just gonna become more and more like a professional sport, even with especially with the Big Ten SEC trying to take over everything. I know Lyle said like a weeks ago that like he could see it end up being kind of like an NFC AFC type deal. Honestly, like that is honestly the direction that I think the sport is headed in. I also think another big thing with moving, I think the salary cap. I think the salary cap, they said it's starting at 20.5 million. So I'm intrigued to see how quickly it gets moved up and how frequently it gets moved up because we see in the NFL every year the salary cap always gets bigger. Same with the NHL, like all the professional sports teams that have a salary cap because baseball doesn't, but they all the salary cap gets bigger every single year. And so I think the same thing is going to happen in college football. So I think it's going to be interesting to see just like how all these like programs that get the most revenue completely just take over the sport because I think honestly that's the direction that this is headed to. Because there's just some schools that just don't make enough revenue, especially with their football team. So I think that seems to be interesting as well. Then the other thing is like the NIL Go portal. Like that's just gonna I feel like that's turning towards being a disaster. Like I don't know, like having to report every single NIL deal over $600 in aggregate or whatever it said through like this website. I think they like I saw some like pictures like of it. And I don't know how it's gonna go over because I think there's so many dudes already getting so many NIL deals. So yeah, I don't know. That's gonna be interesting to see how that turns out. But yeah, there's just a lot of parts to this. It was a lot to unpack. But yeah, it's just a professional sport at this point.
Yeah, I was personally unpacking it while in 30,000 feet in the air. So it was a little easier for me to unpack at the time, but it's still a lot. Like, again, you talk about that salary increases. I know it's supposed to get to about $33 million a school by like the next decade. And it'll come with yearly increases. So, I mean, we'll see, how that kind of works out with, just how much players will be worth come 10 years because this says 33 million, but again, if you look at the NBA, you look at, the MLB or not the MLB, they don't have salary cap, but the NFL, like NHL, like these salary cap increases sometimes will be, 5, 10%, which is a big difference when you're talking about millions and millions of dollars. So it'll be very interesting to see kind of how that works. And I think in general, like just the direction of college football right now, like as you said, like with these private equities kind of funding the teams, things like that. I think they're all very, very interesting. I think we'll really see how everything shapes out because again, college football now it's always been a business, but it's completely a business. And with the NIL Go portal, I think it's like giving people more incentive to cheat because like I feel like every rule you add into college football is another way that someone's going to find a way to break it. Like, let's look at Rick Pitino. He was already breaking the rules. Now that players can get paid, I think he just had something come up. Like, I know this is totally random and off topic, but like when you talk about NIL and playing guys, like who else comes to your mind? Like So like just situations like that where teams are going to take advantage of that. Teams are going to find every little loophole. I think even with the reporting earnings of over 600, they will find some sort of loophole to where like, okay, maybe I'm reporting 300, whatever they're doing, like teams are going to cheat. It's been a part of college football for a very long time. We'll see how individual schools do it, and we'll see how it really impacts teams because if it gets to the point where like the SMUs of the world are just like swimming in money, and like they, like all their investors and all their donors that was stuck trying to get to the game, they just all pitch in and pay Kevin Jennings like $20 million, and he takes with the whole salary cap, like. Like we're trying to figure out how that's going to happen. I mean, obviously it'll be direct pay from schools, but who's to say there those aren't straight from donations to the school? I mean, I think that'll all be kind of very interesting to me. So
Yeah.
Yeah, the first when you think about like reporting NIL, like the first place my mind goes is like Oregon, because obviously we all know Phil Knight, just the founder of Nike, just feeds that school,
Uncle
feeds the
Phil,
Atlantic.
that's
Yes,
Uncle
Uncle
Phil.
Phil, as they call him, Uncle Phil. He just feeds that program NIL money. He feeds it, and it's like obviously we all see how Oregon recruits and recruits guys from the transfer portal. Like a lot of that is because Phil Knight is opening up his pocketbook, opening up the checkbook and handing Dan Lanning like blank checks for some of these guys. And so I think I'm interested to see how Oregon, like I'm sure they're gonna find a loophole for that. Like I'm sure Phil Knight is a smart enough man where they're gonna figure out a way, because I don't know how, because I think the NIL Go thing was like to ensure deals are being made at fair market value. And I'm not sure how like a $1 million from payment is like a fair market value. So I think that like that's one program that I'm keeping an eye on for sure, especially because I don't think they make a ton of revenue from their football team. Like I don't think their stadium is like extravagantly like large where they're like making money, a lot of money off of ticket sales. I think a lot of it is through Uncle Phil. And so so I'm interested to see just like how that works out for Oregon. Obviously now they're in the Big Ten too, so they're going to be directly competing for years and years and years with Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, all those teams that get a ton of revenue and have a ton to split with their players.
Right. I'd want to see like how does like fair market value get determined? Because like what's like Drew Aller's fair market value? It's like if say like some team throws like 7 million, tries to tamper and gets throws 7 million at him. Is that fair market value or and then other stuff with like $600 minimum have to get reported through the NIL Go portal. I want be interesting to see if like some people like break NIL payments up into like 599 payments over like multiple like years. So it still add up to like say like $1 million
Yeah, deferred
in
contract. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
599 dollar payments.
Yeah, I think those will all kind of be interesting. Um, I want to kind of shift into our next topic of conversation. So, ESPN today, they released their future power rankings, which is kind of just a look at how college football teams are doing within around the next 2 seasons. Some pretty interesting stuff in here. Penn State is ranked number 6. That places them third in the Big Ten in the future, with Oregon at number 4. Ohio State at number 2. If anyone's wondering, Texas is the number 1 school in the rankings. Some other things that stuck out. You have Alabama at number 10. SMU is at number 14, if I'm correct, which is over schools like Ole Miss and South Carolina. Illinois at number 17. Is there anything that stands out to y'all with Penn State? Do you think Penn State is justly ranked at number 6 in the power rankings?
Right.
I think it's interesting. Oh, sorry, well go ahead.
I mean, I think number six is feels kind of right. I mean, with they have a lot of like offensive line depth, so I feel like that position group can be a strength for years to come. But then there's like on the offense, it's like QB. I think someone between Grunkmeyer, Smollett, uh, Falzone, and Hun, so one of those guys can turn into like a at least a decent quarterback that wouldn't be like a liability or something. And then I mean wide receivers though is like obviously the three transfers they got this offseason, like they're all out of eligibility after this year, so they're gonna have some like questions there. But I think I think they got a couple like guys incoming recruiting classes and like on the roster, some young guys that kind of a lot of people think can have a high ceiling in future years. And then as for the defense, I mean, it's hard to imagine Penn State not having a good defense, especially as of late, because every year it's like talk is like, oh, how are they going to replace like Chop Robinson? How are they going to replace Abdul Carter? I mean, there's Penn State can like produce like pass rushers on a regular basis. They can usually have some good linebackers, and it's just it would be hard to imagine Penn State not having like one of the top end defenses. So I feel like six. It might be on like the high end, but I still think it's just about right.
Yeah, I think six is probably about right. I am a little confused by this list though because it's supposed to be like a future power rankings, but then they talk a lot about like the 2025 season. And then they also said like on the offensive line outlook that like Nick Dawkins should like carry the group in 2026. Like Nick Dawkins is on like his like sixth and final year of eligibility. Like he's leaving. Like I don't know. I'm not really sure what they were cooking there. Because then like in Star Power, like they talk about all the 2025 guys and all that stuff. So I'm just a little curious, like how they actually based this future ranking on because a lot of the team obviously is leaving after this year. Drew Allen, Nick Singleton, Keyshawn Allen. Like the list goes on and on. But I do think James Franklin has always been a great recruiter. He's been a historically good recruiter. They have talent. They always have talent. I mean, it's just and Jim Knowles is locked up in Happy Valley for a couple of years, so I don't think the defense is going to take much of a dip. I mean, there's obviously going to be a lot of people to replace. I mean, Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Ziki Wheatley, all those guys you're going to have to find replacements for. But I think they're high on a lot of young guys too. Like Max Scramble will be back from injury next year. And, there's obviously people have been high on him since he reclassed and stepped foot on campus. So I think six is about right. The question I obviously have is at the quarterback position. I think the battle next year is going to be really insane. I mean, you have obviously Ethan Grunkenmeyer, Jackson Smolik, if he doesn't transfer at some point, we'll see. And then Peyton Falzone, Beckham Kritza, Troy Huhn, like all those guys are going to be at Penn State. It's just a matter of which one wins the starting job. I mean, obviously, I would lean Grunkenmeyer just because of he has game experience. He's going to be the backup this year, probably, unless Smolik wins the job. So I think that is a question mark. And then, like Will said, the wide receivers. I mean, there's Tyser Denmark, there's a bunch of guys, but even like Liam Clifford is running out of eligibility. Like it's gonna be up to the young guys to step up. I mean, maybe they hit the transfer portal again. I don't know. We'll see. But I think six is probably fair. Just a little interested into how ESPN really like determined this because a lot of 2025 talking here.
Yeah, I think that was an interesting part. Like you look at it and it's like and they said 2025 and 2026, but they also discussed, oh, will Penn State have a multi-year quarterback, which of course they said barring injury, Drew Aller's going to the draft. We know that, but they don't talk about any of the other guys behind. And of course, there's more to their thought process than what they typed into, the story. But I still think I want to see how they kind of feel about Penn State's future. We've been talking a lot about how Penn State's been on a recruiting run, number six overall class for the 2026 class. Just about every week they're racking up another commit, really. If not, twice a week, three times a week, depending on the week. With official visit season, we obviously know that they have a couple guys that they have lined up that probably will commit to Penn State. Obviously, we'll see with some of the top guys. I mean, Joey O'Brien. You got some, five stars that are in the wakes. Some top five guys. So I think it's interesting to kind of see that. I think one thing I was interested to see, like outside of Penn State, was where schools like Michigan was ranked. Michigan's at number 13, which I don't know what their last Future Power Rankings was ranked on, but it's a drop from number six, which we obviously expected. And you talk about a multi-year plan, they have Bryce Underwood, so just kind of seeing that. Right ahead of Penn State though is Notre Dame. Obviously that kind of seems a lot based on last year. But they don't have their starter locked down for the season. Um, they talk about the depth for Notre Dame. It kind of seems like the same thing, but without a quarterback. So I just think it's interesting having Notre Dame ahead. Kind of seems like a little bit of bias off of last season, not what Penn State is doing in the future because you're bringing in three receivers: Trevor Pena, Kyron Hudson, Devontae Ross. You're bringing in Amari Campbell. I think those are obviously all big ads for Penn State, and they didn't really lose much outside of replacing Abdul Carter, replacing Tyler Warren, which again, obviously, were the two best players on the team. But I think it's pretty much consensus that Penn State's a top eight, if not a top five, program in the country right now. So I thought that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I also think it is interesting because like looking at like the teams ahead of Penn State too, you have like the usual suspects like Texas and Ohio State, um, Oregon, Georgia. I think those are all the teams in front of Penn State. But like again, like looking at all of them, like I just like this just feels like a 2025 rankings to me with like a slight like 2026 in there. Which because if you're looking at 2025 alone, like I think that Penn State is a top three roster in the country. Because then they're also like banking on like Arch Manning like coming back from there. You're like, who knows what he decides to do. Like I think he might come back from there just because it's gonna be his first year as a starter. But I think it's just an interesting list. And I think it's interesting that Oregon dropped or moved up actually from 6 to 4. I feel like they always have like people always see them as like a team that has a lot of young talent and is just always going to keep retooling and bringing in transfer portal guys and everything like that. So I was a little intrigued that they're only at 2 spots above Penn State. But yeah, I don't know. That's pretty much it.
And I feel like
But
consistency in this article is a little off because like I mean, I'm looking at like Ohio State says likelihood of a multi-year QB quite likely, and they obviously have Julian saying who has a lot of potential. But then also looking at like Notre Dame, it's like they have CJ Carr, and he's entering his redshirt freshman year, and he was a very highly rated recruit too, and that they described it as definite potential. And then there's also Michigan, and who has GJ Underwood, who another guy who has a lot of potential, like the other three, and they describe it as extremely. So it's like I feel like there's a lot of like inconsistencies in here that don't really line up with like all the teams.
yeah, there was another Big Ten team that stood out to me that I saw on here. And that kind of gives you a scope of where Penn State is. Again, having Penn State as a top three Big Ten team is obviously one is the obvious pick, but obviously it is a good compliment to Penn State. We can look at the bottom of the list. You have Maryland at number 60. Um, they've been trying to be a recruiting powerhouse for a long time, and it really hasn't come. So it's interesting to see them fall all the way down. Like maybe if you asked them 2 years ago, I'm not sure. Let me see what their ranking 2 years ago. Yeah, they weren't even ranked. So I mean, I think no one's kind of been high on Maryland, but Maryland, and I think that's just something that was very interesting to me. I think overall though, I think it was pretty a good list. I mean, SMU at 14, we're gonna have to see, um, especially like there. It's going to be hard for SMU to stay on top. They're in the ACC, but they still don't have the resources that every single school is going to have. And obviously, last year they brought in like 40 guys in the portal, which I don't even understand how you recruit that much guys in 1 year. I would. I bet you they half the coaches did not know most of the transfers names by the time they came. So I think that'll be very, very interesting to me. And we're actually going to touch on one more thing. Um, EA College Football 26 again comes out in about a month from now. And we're rating on the ratings release. We did our team overalls last week. This week we predicted player ratings. I can go over mine real quick. I had Nick Singleton at the top at 95 overall, Drew Allar at 92 overall, AJ Harris at 89, Katron Allen at 89, and Zane Durant at 88. You can look at Will's. Will had Nick Singleton at 96. Drew Allen at 94, Katron Allen at 91, Denied Dennis Sutton at 91 as well, and then AJ Harris at 90. And then to round it out, we had Lexi, who had Nick Singleton at 95, Drew Allen at 92, Denied Dennis Sutton at 91, AJ Harris at 90, and Katron Allen at 89 overall. Obviously, we all had kind of similar lists. The only one that I would say that was different from mine was not having Denied Dennis Sutton in there. I think is we'll kind of see where, how high they are on him. I think I'm very high on Denied Dennis Sutton and even Zane Durant, which I think is something we can all agree. But I mean, I think this was overall, the top five guys. I mean, for you guys, was there someone that was kind of like, debatable, somebody else that should have slid into the list, anything like that?
Yeah, I think Zane Durant probably. I think he was kind of just like on that brink. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if he's rated. Like I probably have him rated an 89, which is like the same as Katron Allen. I think the fact that Ashton Genty, told a group of like a huge group of reporters that he was looking at Zane Durant the most when watching film and was scared of him the most out of that whole defensive line, was just telling, I think. I think Zane Durant is gonna have a huge year this year. He's talked about it. He wants to be an All-American and all this stuff. I think he has definitely has All-American potential. So I think that was one guy that I kind of hesitated leaving out, but I think Kaytron Allen is probably a top five running back in college football, and I think they're gonna rate him as such. The only one like I think with Deny, it's interesting because after watching him all last year, like I can see that he is probably above a 90 overall. I just don't know if the national media is going to see that, who's rating these guys, just because obviously he lives in the shadow of Abdul Carter last year. He was injured for a good portion of the year, not at 100% health, but he was a dominant force in the playoffs. He probably played himself into a top three round draft pick if he was going to leave Penn State this past season. We did, he came back for a senior year. So I think it'll be interesting to see if the national media kind of notices Deny in the same way that us Penn State beat reporters do. But yeah, that's I think Zane Durant was the one that I was a little he was just flirting on the edge there with Katron Allen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Durant, but I'd also say Vega Ona because he was been a stud at left guard this past season, and he probably definitely could be in the top five. I mean, he only had he never conceded a sack and only conceded one quarterback hit in 497 pass blocking snaps last season, and really he also has good athleticism like when he went into like motion and on those types of plays, so I could see Vega having some good like match ratings in college football 26, which could boost him into the top five, but I'd say I'd have him at like 6 or 7, like also kind of interchangeable with Durant because I do think Durant gets underrated a lot, so that definitely could continue to happen in the game whenever they release ratings, but I mean, we'll see.
I was
Yeah.
thinking Zaki. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. You got it.
I was thinking Zaki Wheatley is like a name that I think is probably could potentially be in the top five. I think it's another one of those things where people don't really know who he is on a national scale. They more know Jalen Reed and guys like that and Kevin Winston Jr. who just left for the draft. But I do think Zaki Wheatley is set to be one of the best safeties in the country next season. He's leading the position group now. I mean, I know Jalen Reed says that everyone's gonna be a first round draft pick, but Jalen Reed thinks the QB is gonna be a first round draft pick. So I think he should be high 80s. I'd be really surprised if he's not. I could see him being somewhere around like where Vega is, kind of like Will said. But I think I think Zaki is another name that is gonna be highly rated if the national guys are looking at this, intently.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at like, I know Will mentioned like with Vega, Vega is kind of like you would assume that he's kind of underrated, but honestly, I think last year he finished up at 87. So I think he was definitely that guy that I had borderline sliding in there. Again, deny you can make the argument like if it was my Avery Hills EA college football 26 ratings, I would have denied Dennis Sutton in 92 overall. I would have Zane Durant in a 90 overall. I would have Drew out at a 93. I would have Nick Singleton at a 95. But these are not my rankings. This is EA. We know how EA gets sometimes. I have enough broken controllers to show how EA gets sometimes. So I think that they are going to give Vega one of the love that he probably should get, but probably not to the fullest extent. I think that he's going to get about an 87. He could slide to an 88, especially given last season. I know games usually try to trend off of like how did they end the season, which is going to help deny it in the Sutton's case. Zane Durant is one that again we all agree is like criminally underrated. Again, if he gets that first team All American, he easily shoots up to a 94 overall. I think it'll be interesting to see how his season goes and how they perceive that. Just kind of looking at last season, like with AJ Harris, he got an 88 overall, which was favorable. He Wheatley, he was, I think, low 80s. I'm not recalling exactly right now, but looking at how Kevin Winston Jr. had a 91, even though they only had 1 week to kind of work off of, and then obviously last season, Jalen Reed finished at about an 88 overall. It does look good for Zakee Wheatley, especially being that top safety in that room. I think if Penn State's defense is really good, you have to have him at least an 88, 89 at that point. I think he has the buzz to do so. I mean, he could have a really good season and be early round pick, whether it's second round, third round, maybe even slide into the, the back end of the first round. So, I mean, I think it'll be very interesting. Obviously, top five does not always mean that those are the top five players on the team. We all kind of acknowledge that with Nick Singleton being a deluxe cover athlete, not that it's an indictment on who he is as a player, but he's going to get the number one rating no matter what. Like, you could make the argument that Drew Aller is the best player on the team, but I'm picking Nick Singleton, and I think the fact that EA chose him for the deluxe cover with James Franklin is a very encouraging sign. Again, you look at Katron Allen, I think that'll be the interesting thing because I mean he outran Nick Singleton the whole year. So like Nick obviously had more yards per carry, but Katron was getting the brunt of the carries. Katron was making plays, goal line, you get it to him, he's kicking the door down. Like so, one, I want to see if that celebration's in the game. It's got to be like, come on, we've seen a year of it. Like if EA really knows ball, they would put the kick in the door down in the game. But I mean, yeah, I think overall it'll be interesting to see how close he is to Nick Singleton because we kind of had the same situation last year. I think Nick started maybe a 91 and he was like an 87, and it's like Katron's kind of been the number one guy. It's just that Nick is going to pick up more of the chunk plays. Like, and again, not an indictment against Nick Singleton. That's just, if you're starting the game, usually it's Katron Allen starting the day out. Sometimes they split the backfield around and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that'll be the most interesting thing to see. But again, a month away from the game releasing, we'll see it. EA will probably be releasing those ratings in maybe the next 2 to 3 weeks. Not really sure. So. Well, that's all we have for today. If y'all have any thoughts on our top five lists, make sure you leave it down in the comments below. But for more coverage, visit us at psucollegian.com and follow us on socials. We'll see you next time.